Hello and welcome to Newswire. This is Ayza Omar. Now, during his recent visit to Pakistan, the US Special Envoy, Zalmay Khalilzad, has said that furthering steps by Pakistan will lead to concrete results in Afghanistan's peace process. He lauded Pakistan's resolve for peace in the region, saying they were playing a positive role in helping the peace process in the right direction. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, 14 Afghan security personnel have been killed in a Taliban attack on a military base in central Wardak province. Taliban has claimed responsibility for this attack. As attacks continue on the Afghan security forces and Taliban refuse to attend peace talks expected soon, where is the future of this 17-year war headed? To debate this and more, let's welcome our guests. First of all, I'd like to welcome Mr. Haq Wazirzai. He is a leadership member of Adalat political party. He's joining us here on Newswire to talk to us more on the issue. And also we will have from our Islamabad studios a former diplomat, Mr. Sayyid Ibrar. Hussain, let's start with you, Mr. Wazirzai. As this unfolds and the trip to Pakistan has concluded for the US Special Envoy, how are you seeing these developments?
Every step that which is taken to the peace process, it is very beneficial for bilateral all the South Asian countries. So Afghan government is looking forward for a peaceful Afghanistan, and they are very keen and they are very aggressive to have a peace in Afghanistan very soon. So, but the view and the people of Afghanistan think about that. Whatever we achieve in last 2 decades, we cannot ignore that thing. So the peace must come in Afghanistan by Afghan government and the people's choice, not to whatever the demands of our brotherhoods and the other side. They must be a little fluctual, and we are hoping that the peace process will come good views also in that.
Okay, and you're optimistic about this. Let me pull you in, Mr. Hussain, in this conversation, especially in regards to what the Republican Senator Lindsey Graham also has said. Let me also play the video of what he said a little later. But let me ask you, what do you feel about this development as it's unfolding?
There's more optimism with the visits of Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad, and especially with the recent statement by the US Senator that Pakistan is helpful and things are going in the right direction. I think there is a reason to be more optimistic. But at the same time, as you mentioned earlier, the fight is going on. Taliban are attacking different places in Afghanistan. So our approach should have a caution as well.
Right. Now, let me, for our viewers, play this important video of what the senator, when visiting, said on this occasion.
Well, I'm going to go back and talk to President Trump about my meeting with Prime Minister Khan, and I'm going to urge him to meet with the Prime Minister as soon as practical. Prime Minister Khan was criticized over the decades, over the past 10 or 20 years, about talking about reconciling with the Taliban. He was right.
He was right. And this is coming at a crucial juncture where Pakistan is being constantly invited to the negotiating table. And it's also come under a lot of conflict, fielding accusations from far and wide. Mr. Wazirzai, how is the Afghan government seeing Pakistan's role now?
Actually, the Pakistan government role is very, we need very positive response from Pakistan side too, because we cannot waste time more, because the region needs the peaceful environment. So if whenever we need to, if we have a good South Asia, so we must have peace in South Asia. The people of Afghanistan support the peace process, which is Afghan-owned and Afghan-led. So we are also here looking forward from our Pakistan and from our neighbor countries, that to such dialogues they can also facilitate the environment in peace process.
Mr. Wazirzai, let me ask you very quickly to elaborate when you said you're looking forward to a positive role that Pakistan will play. What exactly does that entail? Could you expand on it, please?
Actually, my view was that we need peace in the region, and that we can also comment on that the Pakistan have done a lots of good job in the past, but we need more aggressive in this point. To be a good South Asia peaceful region in the region. If Afghanistan is in a good peaceful position, so we will all can move forward in the future, and that was my major point.
Okay, Mr. Hussain, let me ask you this. As Pakistan's top military and political leadership has continuously assured that they will do their utmost to help and facilitate these peace talks, how do you see Pakistan's role, especially in trying to convince the Taliban to speak with the Afghan government? In recent developments, they've shown no flexibility, the Taliban, in coming to the table to address the issues with the Afghan government.
Well, Pakistan has always tried to facilitate peace talks. Pakistan has always supported Afghan peace, because Pakistan is one country after Afghanistan which suffers most or which benefits most from peace or no peace in Afghanistan. So we have been making all-out efforts. We have been part of each and every peace process for Afghanistan right from the beginning. You can talk of Murray talks, you can talk of QCG, you can mention Afghan peace process, Moscow format, and so many others. So Pakistan has always been there, and it's Pakistan's keen desire that there should be peace in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, there has been some mistrust between some people in Afghanistan and Pakistan has been blamed a number of times. But this time, it's fortunate that even the Americans have recognized Pakistan's role. And if you recall, in one of the recent visits of Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad to Pakistan, Pakistan had released some Taliban leaders, and subsequently a Taliban leader was also arrested in Peshawar. So Pakistan is doing whatever possible and trying to facilitate this process.
And Mr. Wazirzai, let me ask you this, in light of presidential elections that are about to begin in July as expected in Afghanistan, what are the preparations like, and how can we expect, what kind of turnout can we expect for those?
Yeah, the process of the candidates registration has gone very smoothly, and as per the deadline set by the IEC, the election is scheduled by 20th July 2019. Afghan people are very looking forward to taking part in the election. The government is also determined to reforming the election management bodies. So finally, we got 17 candidates have registered as candidates. Some of them are the key candidates. Major candidates will contest, and the election is likely to go the second round between two front runners. So this is all my view and comments regarding that.
Just one quick last question, if you could quickly elaborate, Mr. Wazirzai. Recently, President Ghani has expressed some form of, you could say, resentment towards Pakistan, trying to represent the Taliban. What is the mood like there? Is there a lot of obvious doubt coming out from the government on Pakistan's role?
Actually, from our government point of view, I cannot comment on that. But as I mentioned in my comment before, that the peaceful Afghanistan is better for Pakistan, better for our neighboring countries also. So that's it. I cannot comment on that.
Okay, thank you so much, Wazirzai, for your input on this crucial topic. Now, let me come back to you, Mr. Hussain. Like I asked him, President Ghani is seeming to express sort of resentment, you could say, or concern that Pakistan is in a way trying to facilitate Taliban, maybe in a way as a representative. What is the weightage in his statement, and what are his biggest concerns here?
I think right now, whatever developments are taking place in Afghanistan or whatever statements are coming, you should see them in election mode as well. If you remember, Mr. Amrullah Saleh was appointed as Interior Minister just 27 days ago, and then he resigned and he became part of Mr. Ashraf Ghani's campaign. And he has been nominated as first Vice President, along with Mr. Sarwar Danish, the second Vice President. So there are so many things which are happening due to elections. And sometimes these statements which are coming in, and some of them may be against Pakistan, or some people may try Pakistan bashing, but they may not be very serious about it.
Okay, now here I'd like to welcome another guest who is an Afghan expert. He's joining us via Skype from Amsterdam, Mr. Rob Regan. Welcome to Newswire. Let me ask you a little, especially in light of the presidential elections coming up in July. Well, if we were to focus on how the peace talks are developing or how relationship between the Taliban and US are seeming to sour a bit, what kind of generous inducements or concessions are the Taliban looking for to be introduced in order to bring them back to the table?
Well, the bad thing is that the Trump administration announced the withdrawal of the US troops, or at least part of it, and that I think that gives the Taliban the opportunity to just wait out things and see what happens, and not giving in too much.
You mentioned that President Trump's withdrawal of troops could be seen as a very big concession, but in one view by experts, it is seen as a really bad move because it kind of gives the bargaining chip in the hands of the Taliban, who don't seem to be running out of time as yet.
That's what I said. Yes, they could just sit and wait what happens when for the Americans to leave, and they don't have to give any concessions or whatever. So that I think that was a bad decision by the Trump administration to announce this, and I don't see how it will bring the Taliban back to the table with a serious opportunity for making a solution. I'm just quite pessimistic about it. I don't see it happen with this Trump policy. Okay,
and Mr. Hussain, coming back to the U.S. Special Envoy's visit, Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad, something that he tweeted out after his trip concluded in Pakistan was that Pakistan needs to do more. Like, what concrete steps is he referring to, especially in regards to influencing the Taliban?
Well, Pakistan had some influence on the Taliban, of course, when they were in government, and Pakistan supported them. But once they became militants and they started fighting the Afghan government forces and the other foreign forces, Pakistan was no longer their supporter. And it was just using the influence that it already had on them. But then what happened after 9/11? Pakistan had joint operations along with the CIA and arrested a number of Taliban leaders. So after that, they shouldn't expect that we would be having much influence on Taliban. But anyhow, whatever little influence we have, we are always willing to use that.
Okay, a little influence that we're willing to use that, but there's still no clarity on what kind of concrete steps will it take, because it seems, and here I want to ask, that the conversation seems to be pretty circuitous. It doesn't seem to be progressing anywhere, the talks, as they unfold, and as they're continuously from different, especially the Taliban, comes statements that the US is on a completely different agenda from what it was decided. How do you see this transpiring in the coming days?
Well, in fact, we don't know whether whatever is happening is direct negotiations, or this is just talk of talks. This is preliminary talks to prepare the ground for talks between Taliban and Afghan government, or Taliban and the US. And once it happens, then of course both sides will be coming with their demands, and that may influence the election schedule in Afghanistan as well, but we are not sure about that yet.
Right. Mr. Rob, let me pull you into this same question. As the violence increases there, Taliban have recently taken accountability of an attack that killed 14 Afghan forces. Do you see them trying to impose their importance, their role in how the presidential elections will also unfold and how these talks will go forward?
Oh yes, very much. And I think, and the Taliban is not giving any signs of being prepared to give in, to do any concession. They don't want to talk with the Afghan government, which is outrageous, I think, for peace negotiations. They don't want a ceasefire, and they'll just wait what the presidential elections will bring, and who will be in charge in Kabul after July. So I don't think they have any reason to give in any way until July.
Do you think that one of the reasons behind why the presidential elections were delayed, as they were earlier supposed to be in April, was so that the Taliban could be given some kind of assurance that there is time to resort this out and maybe form an interim government? Do you believe that this move might have been completely failed?
Perhaps. I don't know if that was the reason. I'm not too much into that. I don't know.
Here, I would like to welcome Mr. Zubair Babarkhail. He's an Afghani journalist. We have him on call from Kabul. Welcome to Newswire. Let me first ask you, as we're talking about the preparation for the presidential elections coming up, a lot of its success really depends on how fair they will be, how transparent can they be seen. Is this a realistic goal to expect from them?
I think there is no hope that there will be a more transparent president election in Afghanistan this year in a few months, because we just had, like few months ago, we had the parliamentarian elections in Afghanistan, which were same as the elections before, fraudulent and full of problems. So this election, as it happens very soon, before Afghan government is going to complete the electronic ID cards process, there are more chances again for fraud in the upcoming election.
Right. And what kind of preparations are way as presidential candidates are successfully registering with the Election Commission? What is being seen as a consensus of a favored candidate? Or is this really going to be a very tight race? Or is the incumbent favored to win?
Registration process has ended yesterday, and about 14 political people, they have registered their names as runners for the presidency, and there is going to be a tough competition, a tough run between two people, which is Dr. Ashraf Ghani and Dr. Abdullah. But there is also fear because there are some more popular figures like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and few others. There is also fear that the election might go to the second round, which will make more problems and pave more way for the fraud in the second round. But so far, we are just we passed on the first step of the president election, which was the registration process.
Right. And coming back to you, Mr. Rob, as they're preparing for presidential election, the peace talks are taking place in parallel. There's also a sentiment that President Trump seems to be in a rush to wrap this up, as he had campaigned in his election campaign that these endless wars need to come to an end. Now, we see a lot of disconnect between him, the White House, and the Pentagon. Do you feel like he might be proving that to the coalition forces that U.S. can't be a reliable supporter or a participant in these conflicts that they're part of?
Well, with this Trump presidency, which is so unreliable and chaotic and unpredictable, they can hardly be a reliable partner in the process, I think. You see Trump saying things, tweeting things, and the next day his ministers try to repair the damage. So you don't really know what's on the Trump's mind, what he wants, and if what he says is really has to be taken serious. Even the withdrawal of U.S. troops, we saw it in Syria as well, announcing the immediate withdrawal of troops, and then his ministers say, "Well, we are not in a hurry. We might need some more time." The same is going on in Afghanistan, I think. So we do not know what the Americans will do and how much time it will take for the troops to withdraw. So in this respect, the US is hardly a reliable partner in the process. Don't count too much on them.
Let me ask you, Mr. Babakil, what is your take on how this conflict is evolving and relations between the Taliban and the US seem to be tensing up as the US says that they will want to maintain certain military bases. Do you see this realistically resolving at all in the near future?
It seemed resolving a few days ago, but after the pinpointings and the arguments that the U.S. representative Zalmay Khalilzad made, and also the Taliban made after before not meeting each other, was like they can solve this problem with fighting, and they are ready to fight if the Taliban doesn't want to talk. So that was something that pushed back the process of meetings and talks and peaceful solution for Afghanistan. And these days there are lesser hopes because both sides showed some aggressiveness, and that slowed down the process. So I think from one side, the point that the Taliban are making, that the actual side is America to talk to and to have a deal with, which is, I think, not a sensible point, because the Afghan government is important and they can play a role in the peace talks. And if the Afghan side is not involved in the talks and in the meetings, I don't think there will be a concrete solution for the problem of Afghanistan. And if there is a deal between the Taliban and the United States without Afghan government participating,
right,
I don't think that will work out in the future.
Okay, Mr. Babakil, one last question, very quickly in 30 seconds, if you could give me an idea, because a lot of what you're reporting from Afghanistan and a lot of what gets lost in translation in the international media is what exactly is the sentiment on the ground. What is the situation, do you feel? What exactly are the Afghans feeling in terms of a solution in ending this 17-year conflict?
There is a war going on. There are fightings in some areas of the country. Just this morning there was this big suicide attack which targeted a police training facility in Maidan Wardak province. This is a routine thing, and the Taliban and also the important point is that in the past, during the winter in Afghanistan, the fighting would have slowed down, and it was not that intense. But this year, because the peace process, the peace talks are going on, the Taliban wants to show their power in the battlefield. That's why this winter there are more attacks and there are more clashes everywhere in the country. So, but like the Afghans, they see no solution via military efforts or fightings. The only solution everyone believes is the peace talks, and that everyone, all the sides who are involved in this conflict, they should come forward, sit down, and have a peace deal.
Mr. Hussain, there's also a lot of controversy around the U.S. Special Envoy to Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad. He's looked upon as somebody who's shown a lot of arrogance as these peace talks have developed, especially in December. And something that happened earlier in 17 January, I believe, kind of made the Taliban a bit put off, and they refused to come to the negotiating table. How do you see his role unfolding? Is this something that he can do more positively?
Well, I thought he should have been done more positively because he is of Afghan origin. He understands Afghan culture, and he should be knowing that what actions could annoy Taliban.
But he has been associated with earlier for money laundering accusations in the U.S., especially with his involvement in the Afghanistan gas pipeline. Does this in any way kind of show that his intentions might not be quite as aligned to the Afghan narrative as he's portraying?
Well, I'm not sure. It depends. Now he's representing the US, and if Taliban have agreed to talk to the US, perhaps he should be able to represent the US, being of Afghan origin, in a better way.
One of the things that he has said this month was when he, in his previous visit, was that the Taliban need to choose between whether they will sit on the peace table and negotiate terms and conditions, or they will have to choose between war. Do you feel like this is something a negotiator should be saying as an ultimatum?
Well, not really. And having known the Afghan cultural background, if you threat anyone, he won't be coming for negotiations to you. Yes, well, in fact, the American stance has always been that fight, fight, and talk, talk. But perhaps this is not working with the Taliban.
Well, we have seen in the 17 years as they've continued to fight one war after the other in Afghanistan and spending over $4 trillion, nothing seems to have come out. And now they're accepting what Pakistan has been saying to have a political solution. But in all fairness, do you feel like Pakistan right now is doing enough, or there is something more that is expected from us? How can we see what concrete steps the US is demanding from Pakistan?
Well, I think this time even the US is recognizing, acknowledging that Pakistan is cooperating, and Pakistan has been very helpful. So I don't know what else can we do now.
And also there are accusations towards the US envoy Zalmay Khalilzad that he might be interested in playing a double game, that he has a old animosity towards Pakistan. Is this something that is reflected here in the government? Does it hold any weightage at all?
Well, that's right. Previously, when he was posted in Kabul, he had been speaking against Afghanistan, but then that doesn't mean that he won't be useful in brokering a peace agreement between the two parties. And we, after forgetting all those statements of his, which he issued when he was in Kabul on posting, we are fully cooperating, and even he has acknowledged it.
Okay, let me ask you one last question. In your view, how do you see this end game? Do you think that there is any possibility that the Afghan government will be able to bring Taliban on the same page before the presidential election?
Yeah, it depends. Primarily, the problem is the trust deficit. If you can bridge that, of course, they can talk to each other. In Mari, they had done so, and they have been doing so in some other places as well. So there is no reason that there is we can say that there is no way out through negotiations.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Hussain, for your input here on Newswire. And with that, we've come to take a short break, and after that, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Newswire. Now, negotiations between the Yemeni government and Houthi rebel representatives broke down in Jordan's capital, with the Yemeni government accusing the Houthis of providing a fake list of prisoners. Meanwhile, Saudi-led coalition pounded 7 military facilities used for drone operations in Sana'a, which is held by rival Houthi forces. In Yemen's nearly 4-year-old civil war, which pits the Iran-aligned Houthi movement against the Saudi-backed government of Mansour Hadi, this has killed tens of thousands and left millions on the brink of starvation. It is said by one estimate that 85,000 children might have died of hunger there. So with the latest development, where does this leave the Yemeni fate? For that, we have our two guests here who are going to be commenting on this. Let me welcome Mr. Yusuf Mauri. He's a Yemeni journalist based out of Detroit, and Mr. Waqar Hitto, who's a political analyst based out of Istanbul. Thank you so much for joining us here on Newswire. Mr. Mauri, let me start with you. How do you see the political process, the peace talks failing, breaking down between the Yemeni government and the Houthis? Was it a practical goal to begin with?
It's a practical goal that should have started years ago. We have to remember that this war is entering into its 5th year. And the reason why the war has continued for so long is because initially the UN, Saudi Arabia, and the US, they view the Houthis as an illegitimate government that have to be taken out of power or to relinquish power from the capital Sana'a and the areas which they control in the central part of the country and also in the southern part of the country as well. The UN, along with the US, they would like nothing more than to see the Houthis withdraw from the capital, Sana'a, to weaken their military power throughout the country and to pave the way for the government of Abdel Mansur Hadi to retake control of the capital, Sana'a, and to essentially run the affairs of the country. And this is something that the UN or the US hasn't been able to accomplish because the Houthis are in power. They control the capital, Sana'a. They've managed to advance militarily, believe it or not, throughout these past 4 years. They've gained a lot of support from the population in the parts that are under their control. And to be quite frank, they're winning the war on the ground when it comes to military advancement. Just last week, they were able to successfully carry out a drone attack on a military parade in the south of the country, which killed, elite military commanders loyal to the government of Abdel Mansur Hadi. So these peace talks haven't been successful, and the reason for that varies. Each side continues to point the finger at the other, accusing them of not abiding or implementing the agreement that was signed in Sweden in December, and that from the prisoner swap, which the government is accusing the Houthis of providing a fake list. On the other hand, the Houthis accuse the government of providing a list of prisoners which are being held by the Houthis under criminal charges and prisoners that are linked to Qaeda-linked militants according to the Houthis.
Okay, let me pull you in here, Mr. Hito. First of all, do you agree with what Mr. Mori has said? And secondly, let me also add to that. These the peace talks that took place in Sweden last year, were they just a confidence-building measure? Was it not practical to expect that a prisoner swap of such a large scale would even unfold?
So first, the guest had mentioned that the situation in Yemen is pretty much black and white in the way that he described it, that the Houthis were in power on the ground and were in control in these key places like Sana'a and other places in the south of the country, and that the people, the population, was accepting of their rule. I would disagree with that, and I would suggest that we should look further into what the Yemeni people really want. Here in Turkey, we hear lots of stories. We receive a lot of stories through the internet and even through our own personal content at TRT that would indicate that Yemenis living in Houthi-controlled territories are not necessarily happy with this situation, with the way life is. People don't have access to normal things like other people would. They don't have access to running water, electricity, secure sources of food. They don't have the normal services that a government would usually provide. In both, I should say, the Houthi and the government-controlled territories. So the situation on the ground is that of a war zone. The situation is not normal in any sense of the word. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that people living in Yemen are happy with the situation. That being said, you've already set up the scenario about the peace talks that happened in Sweden and everything that has followed. Part of that was this prisoner swap deal. Now, today was the deadline for that prisoner swap deal to be handed over to the UN delegation and the ICRC so that they could follow up with the prisoners. The issue here is that the lists of prisoners that both sides have offered up are more than 7,000. In one case, there's 8,000 names of people that the Yemeni government has suggested they have in detention that they would be willing to swap. The two sides were unable to agree on those lists. One side is saying that the other is lying, the saying that the Houthis are lying about the list, and the Houthis are saying that the sides aren't confirming more than 300 names. Now, if we're only talking about 300 names or a few dozen names, then definitely there is not a huge show of motivation or even commitment to this prisoner swap deal. If these two parties were serious about going forward with the prisoner swap deal, they would have brought more confirmed names to the table. The way I understand it also is that there are about 200 names of high-ranking Yemeni government officers that the Houthis have in detention. And those names may not actually be on the table in the prisoner swap deal. So to gain something in the sense that they want to get more people who are experienced, who are Yemeni officers who can join the fight against the Houthis. And the Houthis are probably trying to prevent any kind of threat to their control or certain level of control on the ground by letting some of these officers go. Both parties have not shown any real commitment to the peace process. The prisoner swap deal is an utter failure. The UN envoy to Yemen, Martin Griffiths, is going to have to go back to the UN Security Council and to the other parties involved and tell them, listen, we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how we're going to move forward. Because this prisoner swap deal was supposed to be a confidence-building measure. Data. There was questions about whether that ceasefire was going to apply to the rest of the country or not. But obviously with the incident last week in Lahej, and then just yesterday, the Yemeni-backed government has conducted airstrikes in Sana'a, killing some people. Obviously, this talk about a ceasefire is not necessarily cumulative. It doesn't cover all of Yemen. In Hudaydah, the situation has been relatively stable, but there are still questions about the arrival and delivery of food aid that's being sent by international aid organizations and international parties. So
let's come back to, sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Let's come back to the food aid situation, because that is something that involves both parties here. Let me invite our third guest here, Mr. Hussain al-Bukhaiti. He's joining us from Yemen. He's also a Yemeni journalist who's based out of Sana'a. Could you tell us a little about the situation on the ground, especially in light of the airstrikes that have taken place by the Saudi-led coalition there yesterday?
Yes. The latest led coalition, and is not, as you guessed, said that the Yemeni government has conducted airstrikes. Fighter jet has conducted dozens of airstrikes on 4 airstrikes targeted the so-called former 1st Armor Division Brigade, and as well another strike has targeted a home north of Sana'a. And as well a plastic factory and cheesy buff factory. There are reports of dozens of civilian casualties. And on Sana'a now things are really quiet. But the coalition actually has not maybe targeted Sana'a, the city, for about 2 months. But anywhere else in Yemen, the Saudi fighter jets continue to bomb in most of the cities under the control of Ansarullah Houthi, especially in Sa'da and Hajjah near the Saudi border. And in Hudaydah, they have 4 days ago have conducted two airstrikes in Hudaydah city on Ansarullah Houthi position, killing 7 civilians. And artillery shell and rocket has not stopped in Hudaydah for a single day. I don't know, they are not respecting the so-called truce in Hudaydah, but we see them when Houthi drone unit has conducted an attack on Al-Anad airbase. We see everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Hussain al-Bukhaiti there. Coming back to you, Mr. Mori, this really does pose a difficult situation to understand, especially for viewers around the world who don't have an inside view of what's unfolding in Yemen, especially on the prisoner swap. The list of names given, not accurate. The Houthis have said that they don't have a complete list of the prisoners in UAE and Saudi Arabia. How do you see this? Is there something that we are not seeing between the lines unfolding here?
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's precisely what is happening. There's a lot of false misinformation that's been spewed by commentators and from all walks of life, and that is failing to describe the actual situation on the ground, what this problem and this conflict is really all about. Your guest in Istanbul, he mentioned that, he mentioned what are the demands of the Yemeni people? What do they want? Who does the majority want to see in power, the Houthis or the Hadi-backed government? And in order to find out the answer to that, let's go back to 2011 when this Yemeni revolution started. The Houthis, the Ansarullah movement, they remained in the carrying out the slogans of the revolution, demanding an end to Saudi intervention in Yemen. The Houthis, I say, were welcomed in some of the parts which they have taken over, because the Houthis, they represented the sentiments and the demands of a large portion of the Yemeni people, which is the establishment of an independent Yemeni nation free of US and Saudi meddling.
This is all the time we have in the show. I wish we could elaborate more on this, but some other day. So far, this is all the time we have. We'll be catching you tomorrow at the same time on Newswire. Stay tuned to Indus News.